say a deep thank you to this community that has so warmly welcomed me and so many others in the domestic transracial adoption community. With that, I'm going to introduce the panel and then kind of set some time in space for the conversation that we're going to engage in. I want to start with Dr. Chaitra Worteliker. She is a licensed psychologist, international transracial adoptee from India, and transracially adoptive parent specializing in adoption, trauma, attachment, and racial identity work through her private practice in Denver, Colorado. She is a frequent speaker and trainer at adoption agencies, camps, and conferences throughout the United States, and is an author of the Adoptee Self-Reflection Journal, I Need One. And she's also created the National Adoptee Therapist Directory, also vital. And to learn more about her services and educational resources, you can look at her website, growbeyondwords.com. That's growbeyondwords.com. Welcome. So wonderful to be in conversation with you. And to add you to my extended family of adoption. It's an honor and a joy. Next, we have Marcus Schmidt, who is already in my extended family of adoption close in. Marcus is a transracially adopted person originally born in Silver Springs, Maryland. Marcus was adopted by a family in Northern California where he primarily grew up before relocating to the East Coast for college. After college, Marcus connected with his biological family and found his experience invaluable and thought that maybe what he experienced might be helpful to other adoptees as they navigated the same. Marcus is a mentor at the Adoptment program, which is a program that I founded where adopted adults mentor to youth in foster care. And he uses that time and other work that he does to contribute to the personal development of youth who have been adopted or are in foster care. So welcome, Marcus.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, someone who's already in my extended family of adoption is Milton Washington. He was adopted from South Korea at the age of 8 in 1978, and he settled in Harlem to run his visual identity company, a visual development business, to help companies grow through visual storytelling. In the spirit of old Harlem, he is also a bit of a Renaissance man, amassing a large body of photography work, notably published in the New York Times and Food and Wine magazine. He also has a way with words, and his upcoming memoir, Slicky Boy, is expected to be published in 2021. His newest endeavor is the founding of a revolutionary fitness program called Rock Mill Fitness, where a series of movements, strength building, flexibility, and cardio and conditioning, resulting in helping alleviate joint pain and improve coordination, rhythm, and balance, is all centered on the system of the African stool called the rock, R-O-K. So these are our panelists today. We are thrilled that they took the time out to be with us. And I want to set a few little elements as we come together. This is a big group, but what happens here stays here. We are recording, and we might share that recording out, but what I would say is this is a safe space. And when we get to Q&A, I've made the request that should we get to Q&A and that feels like that's private and personal for the rest of the world, we will not share the Q&A portion of this event. That's my commitment to everybody on this call, ensuring their safety and their psychological, emotional safety. So that's what I do with most conversations that I have, and that's what we'll do here. We did talk a little bit about if you have a question to post that in the chat, right, Mike? Do you want to just do that again for folks that may not have heard? If we're going to have time for question and answer, but if you have a question, Mike, tell people what they should do.
They should, in the Groom Zoom chat me directly, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end.
Beautiful. And if we don't get to your question, we apologize in advance, and hope that in some way, shape, or form, whatever you would like to discuss is covered in some way. Before we start the questions, I also want to just have everybody just sort of get in the space of like whatever that looks like to you, just sort of honoring the space that we're occupying, the ground that we stand on, sit on, what have you, and the ancestors that came before us, in whatever way that looks like to you, just even to give it a brief thought. That's important. And I also just feel like holding space for our collective experiences. There's not many times in my life, at least, where this many people gather together who have this innate knowing about certain pieces of our existence. And it's something to be celebrated and grateful for me, at least. And then that all gives way to what is an incredibly difficult time. And I don't need to tell anybody or remind everybody what happened before this resurgence of Black Lives Matter in such a way that has, sort of rocked the world, what we were sort of sitting with. And I think it's important to connect the two things in the way in which we enter into this conversation. And what has been most noticeable for me as an individual has been sort of several themes of what was happening with COVID-19, coronavirus, the pandemic, however you refer to it, that felt familiar to me. Loss, a lack of power and control, not having information about things that could save my life, or having misinformation about things that could save my life and is pertinent to me, but I don't have access to for whatever reason. Family separation, knowing that family is there, but not having full access to them. I think many of us have felt that in our lives in some way, shape, or form. And now the rest of the world might also understand that just a little bit more, based on the fact that we can't see grandma, we can't see our immunocompromised cousin. We're separated from the people. We know they're there, but we can't see them. Having to clock our every single move. And this is particularly related as we start to move our way into this discussion about Black Lives Matter and race. As an adopted person, I can speak for myself. I've spent the better part of my life clocking my every single move, and thoughtfully, precisely moving both physically and emotionally to make sure that I don't hurt somebody. I don't bring up something that's going to hurt my family of origin. I don't talk about my family of experience, my family of origin. That's what I call birth family, adoptive family. I toggle between the two. Family of origin is my birth family. Family of experience is my adoptive family. Worried that as a kid, I would upset my family of experience by mentioning my family of origin, and sort of moving in that. So that's adoption. On top of it being a brown girl in a white community, just knowing that I had to mind my movements with precision. So all of these things are happening, right? And then Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd on top of it. And I sat with a lot of complexity and confusion around a lot of this, and also just a lot of, quite frankly, familiarity in terms of the things I just mentioned, and saying like, actually some of this stuff feels really familiar to me. And being very mindful of the fact that in some ways now, potentially through these events related to the pandemic, would help people understand what it feels like to be adopted in some way. I don't like it, but I'll take it in terms of trying to bring more empathy into our experiences as a whole, from just adoption, no differences of race attached to it. So then that brings us to where we are in terms of Black Lives Matter and what that would mean to us as transracially adopted persons. I can't have any bit of conversation related to that without acknowledging that throughout the pandemic, early on in the pandemic, as a matter of fact, I was feeling a deep sense of pain, anger, chaos, and confusion around my Asian friends and members of my extended family and community who were being brutally assaulted, attacked, and racist behavior towards them throughout the pandemic. That has not stopped or slowed. I see this happening still all the time. And so there's this connectivity to this idea that racism is very much alive and well. and we're all experiencing that. So for everyone on this call who's experienced any of that in greater form these days, I hold space for you, and I love you, and I'm sorry it happened, because I know how many of us are dealing with this all combined. So I think we really have to start at the beginning, right? And as we move into the questions, I want to ask the panel just to sort of to track back just a little bit, right? To this way that being transracially adopted has really impacted your identity. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, there's two pieces of this for me, right? It's the adoption piece and the differences of race. I want to lean harder into the differences of race, but knowing that the adoption piece is there and is big. So I'm going to start with Kshetra, and I'm going to ask you, you know, how has being transracially adopted impacted your identity, and give us an example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, as I've gotten older, I've realized as much as adoption is a part of my identity, race feels more at the forefront. And I didn't think I could name that when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I can see that. I mean, I've always had the sense of living in between worlds, like I'm too much and not enough all at once. You know, I'm too brown to be considered American right away, but I'm too culturally white, having grown up in predominantly white spaces, to be considered Indian. And so it becomes this constant cycle of imposter syndrome, of this self-doubt, like I don't quite fit in with this group, I don't fit in here, and it's this between worlds kind of thing. And I see that in so many experiences throughout my life. I even think about in high school, you know, the two particular people I dated. One was Indian, and culturally his family was Indian, and I wasn't Indian enough for them. But then another person I dated who was white, he let me know, like, he had never dated a person of color before, and this felt kind of strange, and he wasn't sure he should, even though culturally I fit better with him, I understood him better. So it's just always the sense of trying to wear this chameleon mask. I mean, we talk about code switching, but I don't even feel like I knew enough about Indian culture to say that I was doing any code switching. It was much more of this chameleon mask. I was always trying to figure out what people expected of me in a particular situation, what their assumptions were, and how could I fit those or defy those. So it's always the sense of being in between.
Yeah, I want to go to Marcus next, because Marcus, we've actually had this conversation of navigating the two worlds, and I think particularly as we think about this, it's when you're navigating these two worlds, where did it show up for you in terms of your early life? Like, when did you realize there wasn't like a Black kid in every family? Because it was school for me, but I don't know, like, I thought every family had a Black or brown kid in it until I went to school, and I was like, oh wait, where is everybody? I guess, like, I'm unique. But what about for you?
Yeah, so similar for me in terms of when it was really apparent to me that my situation was really unique. Definitely in school. Certainly growing up elementary school, you just get a lot of questions from kids, and it's just, I found myself at an early age having to answer these complex questions that I felt like I wasn't maybe mature yet enough to answer well. But you know, one of my cousins is a redhead, and you know, he would come by my school to pick me up, and I'd be like, "This is my cousin," and people would be like, "No, it's not." And then having to explain the whole story behind why my family looks the way it does. So it was pretty apparent very early on, through largely, you know, all these questions I would get from classmates and stuff like that growing up, that my situation was quite unique. And then I had to navigate it, you know, and that would turn into questions to my adoptive parents, like, hey, like, you know, how did I specifically end up in this situation? What should I say when people ask me this? Just kind of figuring it out as I went on how to talk about it. So
Yeah,
So
and
yeah.
it sounds like to me, based on a lot of our experiences collectively, is that there wasn't a conversation within our families of experience that directly named some of the things that we would have to navigate as part of our experiences. And I want to make sure that when we have this conversation, so Shatra, your parents are white, right? Marcus, your parents are white, right?
Yeah.
Your parents of experience are white.
Right.
Then I'm going to move to Milton, who has a slightly different experience in his family of experience, which is you were adopted into a Black family. So when you think about identity development as a Black, Korean, person of color, however you identify, how did that look like in terms of identity development within your family of experience?
Milton, you're on mute.
Okay, now I'm muted, right?
Good.
Okay,
Yep.
so it's kind of a strange question for me because when I was a Black kid in South Korea, I was excluded because I was Black. I didn't really understand what Black was, but I was always told by my mother that I looked like my father in America. So I just had these big dreams of going to America. And then at the age of 8, I get adopted by a Black family. And then the wrinkle there is it's also a Black military family. And I think that's slightly different. So for me, identity was that journey of identity was, okay, they're calling me Black, but I don't know what Black is. But I kind of want to be Black real bad because my dad is. Then I get adopted by this family. I'm like, oh, this is what Black is. And I formulate my ideas about what Blackness really means. But I'm on a military base in South Korea. And then we moved to the States, and it was kind of a culture shock. And I was just like, wow. And my journey into Blackness seems like it just kind of never stopped. But I always had a deep identification with Blackness, and I also have to say I also had a deep affinity for Blackness, because kind of what I equate so much of Blackness is in terms of style and flow and art and confidence and so many things. So I'm not sure exactly if I answer the question, but it's a very, very interesting journey that for me, in my proximity to Blackness and my ownership of Blackness, it just seems like it's an ongoing situation.
Yeah, well, Milton, look, what's true for all of us as human beings is that our identity is constantly in a flow, right? And in a way shaping, but our core comes when we're growing up. Our core foundation for our identity happens in our families. And what's so fascinating about now, and this is where I think this conversation, hopefully will go as we come together as a group and we open up for questions. It's like, right now, a lot of white adoptive parents that I've known for 20 years and have been coaching for 20 years and been pushing and putting urgency behind their celebration of the culture in which their child came from, and bringing that into their family and to acknowledge all these amazing things. Now they're like, oh, wait, I guess we should have done more of that now, given the sense of urgency around physical protection, emotional and psychological protection. But there's this layer of cultural expansion and cultural intake that is so important, because what we know to be true in the world, which we're experiencing now, is this deep, oftentimes, when it presents itself as a deep hate of Blackness and a fear of, or a jealousy of on some level, or a you know, if anybody saw the film Get Out, a desire to possess a strength that we know is core to Black and African American people. So this idea that I love what you said about, you know, I always felt, you know, an affinity for Blackness and things that were Black, and for me, I always felt it too, but not because not because my family did, but because it just something inside of me wanted that. But all that to say that, you know, if we're doing our work in families that are formed and expanded through transracial adoption, we are not just looking at how to protect emotionally, physically, and psychologically, but we're celebrating. We are we're intaking all of these different things that will help our child be walking in joy and confidence, because we know that on many days there will be dark days, and you have to tap into that joy and that beauty and that ebony excellence that is part of our shared experiences, ancestral to today, and that strength. So, you know, I had to go find that on my own, and I moved to Harlem 20 some odd years ago to find it. Really knew that I needed it and went and got it. So that said, you know, Chaitra, talk about some of the things that maybe your family did do to bring in the cultural elements that you needed, because I think like that goes hand in hand on some level with the parts about, you know, making sure there's safety around you physically. So were there cultural elements that your family brought in proactively that helped you sort of ground?
So, I mean, very early on in my life, there was a group of parents, white parents, who had adopted Indian children and grew up in Minnesota, where there was quite a large population. But we would go to these annual picnics where the kids would learn about Indian culture and the parents would receive some sort of education. But we only did that until, you know, early elementary school. And then I have a brother who's also adopted from India, not biological to me, but you know, he and I both kind of pushed back as we started to get a little older and wanted to do other things. And they never pushed us into it and wanted to challenge us to keep doing it. And I feel like, you know, every kid goes through those phases where we just want to assimilate and not think about being adopted, not think about being a person of color, and just feel quote unquote normal. But at the same time, I think if it had been a part of their life, not just something pushed to be part of my life, but our entire family embraced the culture, kind of like we were saying, I think that would have given it a different feel, different direction, so that as an adult, I wasn't feeling like I had to try and re-enter into this entire community that I knew nothing about.
Mm. You know, I like to say that my amazing family in Rhode Island, my white family, they adopted me and they kept doing white things. I wanted Stevie Wonder, they wanted Stevie Nicks. I wanted, you know, Soul Train, they wanted Hee Haw, you know. And so I think that's why I wanted to start this conversation in that place of like, you know, how has your identity been formed in this matrix? And then what are some of the things that we know to celebrate and bring in culturally? Because right now, right along with, again, these things, that these protective factors and these ways in which we want to train people to be, everybody to be in service to protection of Black lives, right? And that means physical, psychological, emotional. That also is about a real commitment to celebration of those things that make us Black and proud. And that means our friends and extended family members who aren't Black or brown, how are they to do those things? What does it look like to really celebrate, not just consume something, but truly celebrate it? So with that in mind, I want to ask Milton, you know, can you name some of the things that were things that your family celebrated around Blackness that you really felt a centering on?
Okay, there we go. I'm off mute. You know, something really that I think the answer to that question, April, is, you know, like I said, my parents are Black. My father's from Fort Worth, Texas. My mother's from Beaumont, Texas. And my brothers and sisters, Don, Donna, Darren, and Dwayne, hell, that's a way to celebrate Blackness. They all got the D names. It's just kind of, you know, it's how we do, you know. But but like I said, it was military, and that kind of made us different, even within the Black community. But in terms of celebration of Blackness, you know, I guess it was just pervasive. It was day to day. It's Saturday morning, and I'm 10 years old, and Marvin Gaye is, you know, playing on the radio, and you know, my mother and my father, they're in their room, talking, and just always seemingly having a good time, and always seemingly deep in conversation. A conversation that just sounded like two people not only loved each other, but two people who really respected each other. There were books everywhere, and my sister Donna would pick up a book on a Friday, a 700-page book on a Friday when she was 14 years old, and be done with it by Sunday night. My brother Don was in his room making little superhero figures, and drawing them, and coloring them, and cutting them out, and creating fantasy lands. And you could hear him do his art in his room. And me and my brother Darren and Joe, we were three kids, also known as the three little boys, that got on our bikes at 9 in the morning, wouldn't come back until 7. You know, so my answer is really, in a lot of ways, our celebration of Blackness and our family culture, which is so connected to Blackness, was just every day. And so for me, it just kind of naturally kind of permeated and aligned with kind of my own morals and desires, and just kind of my way my way of being to happiness. It was like I knew I was Black, and I knew that Black was kind of cool. To be honest, that's how I saw it. You know, I remember the day when I was in Korea. My mother and I, we had moved from a town called Dongdaecheon to Pupyeong, and we lived in a studio apartment right across the street from the base called Camp Market, which is a massive base. And my mother, being in the line of work she was in, she worked at the other end of the alley that we lived at, the kind of the top of. And I just remember, the kind of to me, in my mind, this was the absolute first time. So we must just been a day or two in, at 6 years old. I remember noticing the difference between white soldiers, like a group of white soldiers walking out, versus a group of Black soldiers walking out. You know, white soldiers just, you know, they look different than Koreans, that's for sure, right? But, you know, they seem to be kind of quiet. And, you know, I remember, you know, the guys that had the cigarettes rolled up in their sleeve, and they kind of spoke kind of quietly to each other. And, you know, in the eyes of a child, they, you know, to me, quite frankly, they seemed kind of pedestrian and boring to me. But then I remember seeing the Black soldiers, you know, they were louder. They all seemed to be smiling. They seemed to be having a better time. They seemed to, and I remember I used to look at the feet of the Black soldiers, because I swore they were gliding on air, the way they moved. Like I swore it, and I tried, and I would sometimes come up behind them to where they stepped to see if I can see footprints. They just seemed really, really cool to me. And you know, I remember that was the first time when I started to look at my own skin differently. So it was just, I knew that there was a difference. And because of the rejection that I got from Korea, from my own Blackness, and to see that they're rejecting me for something now that I kind of could confirm that it was a positive, I was just like, hell, I'm in this boat, and I'm enjoying it. You know, this is the team I want to be on.
Mm. Yeah, no, and it's, I love the fact that, you know, you had the, you know, this deep, you know, sort of affinity for Blackness, and the noticing of those things. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time there, because I think so much of what we're seeing, right, or what our eyes are fixed on today, are harder images, are things that, you know, people go out of their way to point out are the deficits or the things that come with being Black that are negatives, if there are those things that people want to pull out. So I really wanted to sort of to do that, and also to put us squarely in the space of our cultures within and traditions within the experience of transracial adoption. Like, celebrating those things are almost just as important as creating the right environment for the protection. So I wanted to name that. I wanted to make sure we did that. Milton, that was amazing, because now we're going to pivot, because we have to pivot, right? We have an urgency around pivoting to this idea that we can be rooted in this this experience. And I have to say that I'm with you, and I know enough about Marcus to know that he is as well, in terms of our experiences of Blackness, to say that I never looked in the mirror and wanted to be white. Even when it was hard, even when I had the N-word thrown at me, even when I knew a teacher was doing something that they shouldn't do or was doing to me that not to my classmate, even when my hair didn't look like my white, you know, peers in school and they were the pretty girls, right? I didn't want to ever be anything but Black, biracial. That's what I wanted to be. So I consider that a triumph on some level, because not because my parents wanted to erase my race, but they just didn't do anything in service to it. Right? They just didn't do anything to celebrate it. There were no books on the bookshelves that celebrated Blackness. There was no music that we leaned into. There was no food or anything like that. All that to say that now we pivot to this idea that we're in this space of there's much to celebrate and protect. And then we go out into the world as persons of color and adopted persons. And Marcus, I want to have you talk about, you know, some of your early experiences, and how you navigated, you know, being noticeable in the world, in your family of origin, in your family of experience, and in the world. So were there things at school that happened? Were there moments when you were like, oh yeah, there's a noticing that I will be treated differently than my family? And did your family help you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, so yeah, so that was, you know, I'm fortunate, even though, you know, like you, April, my adoptive family, it's almost like they kind of stuck their toe in Black culture every now and again, versus my biological family, who's very much in it, of course, and swimming in the deep end. But I was fortunate that I had an adoptive family that they're very sensitive and understanding and inquisitive about the racial issues that occur in Black culture and being a person who's a part of the Black community. So yeah, so I mean, at a pretty young age, we would have a lot of conversations around that, and in terms of, you know, that I was going to be seen differently in the world, and so that I needed to present myself differently. And this came down to, like, a specific examples would be when I went into, like, the toy store as a kid. My adopted mother, she would be like, hey, make sure you don't have your hands in your pockets, because somebody might think that if you're leaving with your hands in your pockets, you might be taking something with you. And, you know, don't wear a hoodie at night, things like that. So it was pretty, you know, even though at that age, you know, I was young and I wasn't experiencing racial discrimination, I just became aware, and it was like implanted in my mind that I was going to be seen differently as a Black kid, a Black man, growing up and navigating the world. So it's something that always stuck with me. And it's like, you know, like most Black people would agree, it's like your identity, it's something that weighs on you every single day. It's something that you consciously think about, having to navigate the world. And I think being Black in the world, you have to think about that and how people are going to treat you much earlier. And so yeah, I mean, those conversations kind of fed into my own psychology and understanding that the world was going to treat me differently as a result. So yeah, there's things like, you know, just keep your hands out of your pockets, just things of that nature. Don't wear a hoodie. From a young age, you know, I was pretty much aware that, you know, the police was going to see me differently, you know, and not to wear a hoodie around them, things of that nature. So in that way, I think, you know, they're ahead of a lot of other transracially adopted families who had adopted Black kids, because I grew up with a couple of other families who were like that in my community, who weren't, their parents weren't as in line with that and teaching their kids about that. So I find it valuable that I got that kind of insight from them and that parenting from them pretty early on. But yeah, it definitely shaped my perspective of the world and how to navigate it from having those conversations, certainly.
So thank you, Marcus and Milton. And so, Shadra, I want to start to sort of move into when, you know, things started to materialize for me, and I wonder about for you around, you know, the brutalization of Black bodies in our time, right? And for me, that was Rodney King. And I was in college, and we you know, it was me beyond sort of comprehension. Like I sort of knew, even without social media, that bad things were happening to Black people, but that really kind of sort of like jolted me into a different kind of you know, just a different kind of attachment to fear in my body, right? So I wonder about that for you, and how you experienced that, and how that started to, you know, maybe have you thinking about what does it mean to be a person of color in the world, surrounding this idea of a Black body being brutalized.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I was a teenager when all the riots happened, everything was going on with Rodney King, and I remember that same thing, seeing things on the news and feeling like I recognized there was something to do with skin color there, but in my family, we didn't talk about race, and it wasn't intentional. It was just my parents were not great communicators. They didn't have the tools or resources as white adoptive parents to know how to do that. So I think they sort of hoped I'd absorb what I needed to know and make sense of it. So that, I remember that being something that piqued my interest, and I always had a strong sense of justice and what's right for any type of marginalized group. I always empathized. But really, it was really when Michael Brown was killed. I mean, that when the BLM movement truly started, you know, I had just adopted my son who is Black, and it brought it to a whole new level of awareness that, you know, this what it really did was it drove me to learn more about the systemic piece of racism, not just seeing things at face value, recognizing overt types of racism, understanding how people who are Black moved through the world in different ways, but to really understand and go back and look at the history of things and look at the entire system. And that awareness was really earth-shattering for me, just I would say in the last decade, to really see how history is not what we've been taught it is, and to have to relearn everything and retrain the way that I think about things. And certainly, I mean, with my son, it feels all the more pressing. That's everything to me. So
yeah, I appreciate that, and hold a lot of space for parents who are parenting Black and brown kids today, in this very moment where it feels they're just truly unsafe. I've just gotten so many phone calls and facilitated so many dialogues on this topic, and it makes sense to sort of go here a little bit, which is, you know, I hear it all the time, and I'm experiencing it now more than ever. It's like, well, where do we start? What do we do? How do we talk about this? Like having hard conversations about race is never going to be easy, right? And we just are so not practiced at doing it. And that goes right. It's that. So for all of us, right, there's this like well, many of us are in our families, and I don't want to speak for everyone on this group, but a lot of anecdotal evidence will tell me that we don't have a lot of practice doing a few things, and they all roll into adoption, right? and we don't have a large capacity to talk about sex. That's where everybody starts, by the way. So let's just start there. No one wants to talk about sex. No one wants to talk about money. No one wants to talk about differences of race and culture. And so what do? We don't lean into and steer into those heavy conversations. Now, as a result of our family structures, many of us, including the folks that have been a part of AKA and in this organization and others like it, like we actually not only want to have a desire to have these complicated conversations, we work at it and we practice for our own, for ourselves and as a result in the rest of the world. So I think it's just, so important to sort of name this thing that is, actually making space and proactively walking head on into a conversation about something that's really, really, really hard. And now we know that not only is that better for our humanity to, expand and to be in growth mode, but it actually is urgent around protecting people, human beings, because we have to talk about those things. So there's a certain piece of this that is about now, and you also mentioned history, which is so critically important, because right along with this denial of, sort of having to have to talk about it, is this like, sitting with this idea that certain things never happened, or that they happened or it happened once in a while, it's not a big deal. Recently, I had a podcast conversation with my mom, and the question was, what would you say to 16-year-old April? And she said, well, I would apologize. Because I thought when we adopted you that there would be no more issues of race. And I am just in a deep place of chaos and confusion around the fact that there are still, and it seems more so, these issues. And I just found that fascinating because, and important, and also like, wow, like that's gonna take a lot. So I'm gonna kick it to Marcus and then Milton, sort of on this topic of, your experiences around, early experiences around Black Lives Matter. And then what does that mean for like, the conversations within your family? And Marcus, I'd actually like to have you talk a little bit about this experience that you're experiencing now after the pandemic, which is being embedded into your family of origin, which is a Black family that you're now spending time with, and how different that experience is if you had been maybe experiencing this moment with your white family in Northern California versus your Black family in Maryland. So I want to have you talk a little bit about that too. I think that's unique.
Yeah. So I think in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of police brutality, in terms of racial injustice, I think it's largely between my two families, it's emotionally impacted everybody the same way. I think that my Black family has been, my birth family has been just much more open to talking about it, and having a conversation around it in terms of, what it looks like, how does everybody feel, and what to do about it in our own personal lives. And I think that largely comes down to being Black. I mean, culture is a topic of conversation a lot, just in general. And differences in culture comes up as a topic of conversation a lot. Just being a minority, being a part of a minority culture that you cherish, it just comes, the ease in which you can talk about differences in culture is just easier among people of color, for at least within my family. I think I've just seen that dynamic play out versus my adopted family. It does come out, I've had several conversations with one of my adopted brothers and my adoptive family members, certainly. But it doesn't get as in depth, certainly. It's kind of more of like a, how are you feeling? God, this is terrible. Let us know if you need anything. With, my birth family, which I'm, spending a lot of time with now, kind of quarantining down here in Virginia, Yeah, it's been different, you know, because down here, you know, I have three younger half siblings, Black, obviously growing up in this world, and it's a phenomenal period to kind of educate them about how they're stepping into the world. Very similar in the way that, you know, my parents spoke to me about how I needed to navigate the world growing up. You know, we're now having those conversations and I'm being the teacher about instructing them like, hey, look at this happening on the news right now, and kind of using that as a stepping stone to go into these larger topics of how you need to maneuver through the world as a Black man or a Black woman in the case of my sister. So the topics get a little deeper. You know, we had a conversation the other day about what do you say when a police officer comes up to you and you're not quite sure when you're not doing anything wrong. Like, what would you say in that scenario? And we went through each one of my siblings and like had a role play. Like, what would you say in this scenario? Like, what would you do? And you know, it's very interesting also, similar to Milton. So my biological family, or, you know, we have this thing in common, that my biological family comes from like a military Black background as well. My biological dad he spent a lot of time in the Marines as well. So he's very familiar with kind of law enforcement and de-escalating situations and those kinds of interactions that you might have with somebody. So he kind of presents interesting ways and a thoughtful discussion about how to de-escalate those kinds of situations, not present yourself as a threat, not give anybody an excuse, you know, things of that nature. So it's very interesting, very, very kind of contrasting experiences based on the comfort level of having those discussions in each family. And it's been an interesting thing for me to have to navigate. But yeah, helpful nonetheless. And I've taken away a similar thing where it's just there is no easy way to talk about it. Whether you're a parent of a Black kid or a person of color, it's kind of, you have to dive in the deep end, because at the end of the day, you have to realize maybe it's an uncomfortable conversation, but at the end of the day, you know, it's somebody's life, or could potentially come down to that. So having these conversations around Black Lives Matter, interacting with police are just necessary things that you should see yourself as you need to have those conversations with your child. So that's kind of the experience that I've had, and that's the wisdom that I've been giving to anybody who's been asking me, hey, like, how should I have this conversation with my children, things of that nature. So that's where I just leave it at. Yeah.
So important. I think about like how we how all of our personal operating systems are designed in large part based on our experiences and how we, you know, the things we consume, how we move. And it's just very important to acknowledge this, you know, the difference between like sort of growing up in a Black family and growing up in a white family. Like there's some things that I heard you say that were really amazing in terms of your white family, like sort of at least being somewhat, you know, kind of like saying like, okay, this is a horrible time. How are you? What, like, and then just a different level of depth and conversation that you have to have within your Black family, because you have to have it, you know? So there's this tension that's there, that's just real. And I've been thinking about you a lot, just how this might be being in now and being with your family of origin. So I've been thinking a lot about that and how that must feel too. So thanks for sharing that with the group. I think it's really important. And now, Milton, I want to hear from you in terms of, you know, where Black Lives Matter sort of has been sort of part of your moving around in the world, and how how you're holding that today.
Yeah, you know, for me, Black Lives Matter is just kind of almost a branding or a formalization of kind of the grievances that I think Black folks have had for quite some time. And, you know, I think currently, like, you know, with my family, we don't necessarily have like big conversations around Black Lives Matter per se. Really, it's just a kind of a continuation or an accentuation of the conversations that we've had about white people trying to retain power, whether at a macro level or a micro level, and how there are so many white folks who, in attempt to either retain power systematically or from an individual kind of a power play standpoint, hey, I'm better than you, so therefore I should be able to be here and you should be over there type of thing. It's just a continuation of what we've always said. It's almost kind of been a conspiracy theory that Black folks have had that now is just kind of out front in your face. And, somebody like Trump will just now brazenly do the things that we as Black folks used to say that white people did behind closed doors. And, I think a lot of Black folks don't have, really, really nice words about those white folks. But then it's like, who's who? And, everyone is dynamic, they're good and bad. So it's a kind of a, with all the feelings going on now, to see a man murdered on film, the feelings that we Black folks have had are now just out front in your face. Yeah, like I said, the audacity of the act of Floyd, it can really, it's making Black folks just extremely, extremely angry, to the point of, I think many Black folks have always wanted to kind of lash out. And that lashing out now is almost to an uncontrollable state. And I think that dynamic, if you accept that dynamic, I think there's a very, very interesting part of that dynamic that I think I want people to know about Black folks. I just think pound for pound, and this might shock folks, but pound for pound, like Black folks are, there are plenty of Black folks do a lot of bad things out there. When you've been having your foot on your neck for ages, it'll push you to places, and it might help feed the narratives that are out there. But I know a lot of Black folks, I know a lot of Asian folks, I know a lot of white folks, I know a lot of people from all around the world. And maybe what I'm about to say is a bit biased, but I just think that when you really get to know Black folks, they're some of the most kindest people ever. I'm saying real, like genuinely kind and genuinely want to help and connect to your humanity. I think it's telling that after 400 years of this, pound for pound, Black folks, instead of wanting revenge, Black folks want to be left alone. They want to be left alone. They want to be left alone to kind of pursue the dream and live a normal life. And I think that's telling. It's not like we want to take something from a bunch of folks. We want to be left alone.
Yeah. We
just want to be left alone. And to me, I think that's a significant difference, I think, to notice in this current dynamic. But I have to also say about Black Lives Matter, kind of a lot of I think the talk, even, as we talk here today, we're talking about having these conversations that are so valuable and vital with others, whether it's our adoptive families or our extended network beyond, kind of our own ethnic background or cultural background, etc. I think Black Lives Matter does, kind of a significant job of highlighting and putting a flashlight on all those things that, like I said, were kind of conspiracy theories until now, that held by Black folks. But I also think now, though, there almost needs to be you know, kind of a equilibrium or a balance of the Black Lives Movement that really focuses, I think, so much on the things that happen. And now I think that we as Black folks, we need to close the door. We need to close the door and get everybody to sit down and gather around. For us Black folks, we need to get on the same page of what the hell we want. You know, because I think there are a lot of forces out there that will take every opportunity to undermine every effort that we had, which is kind of typical. It's just the way it's been. You know, they will continue to undermine us to kind of retain that power. And, you know, but now we need to become a lot more kind of organized in, hey, this is where we are, and this is where we want to be, and this is how we're going to get there. And within that, the number one objective is, first and foremost, is to heal from the traumas, and, you know, both individually and collectively. And we need to really start talking about, you know, from that healing, you know, to try to fix one of the things that we as Black folks, we got an issue with. We have an issue with trusting each other. And there's a lot of implications on that. And there's a lot of reasons why many of us don't trust each other the way that we need to in order for us to move forward. Me coming from this background of Blackness, but from South Korea, so I come to America, and I'm like, yo, we gotta pay attention to this other thing. We gotta pay attention to this other thing. Yeah, you know, all the bad things that have been happening to us. Yeah, everybody, we need people out on front lines and going out there and fighting that fight. But like I said, we need to close the door. We need to get on the same page about what we want. And I'm talking, not to say that there's none of that work going on, but I'm talking about a really close the door, close the blinds, and let's get real. Let's get real, and let's talk it. Let's put it all out on the table, and so we can really create some strategy on the direction we really need to move. That's realistic, and I hope that's going to happen soon. And I'll tell you what, you give me a little money in the microphone, I'm gonna try to jump out there as best I can.
Well, that's why we have you here with us today, Milton. And I think it's so important because you have this this important acknowledgement of a lot of things coming together. And if adopted persons don't know how to navigate this, it's like the both and, right? You can have an amazing family of experience and yet still long for your family of origin. You can have a culture that you're raised in that suits you, that feels good, and also long for, want, desire the traditions and the things that are culturally more responsive to you and who you are in your body and in your spirit. So it's the both and that's why I think spaces like this are so important, because we're coming to the table tonight with a lot of folks who are sitting with what I know many of us are, which is like, yo, like this is a lot, right? This is a lot. I actually almost can't believe it. And yet I know, right? I know you can't deny these things. So this is a lot. And like, I'm about to do something. Like I'm about to do something. I need to do something. And I've been doing something, some things. I want to do more things. And what I hope we can steer into a little bit now is this this unique place that transracially adopted persons occupy of like holding complexity and kind of, you know, being pretty good at it. And I also want to just say this too, because we have to, given you know, some of the things we know and the data that's out there, is that this is also really, really difficult with the overrepresentation of attempts to suicide in adopted persons, with some of the mental health challenges that we have as a collective. You know, this is not easy, but those of us who come to the table in forums like this, at times like this, when we're all together and we're just feeling this collective energy, that's where I want to sort of take it next, is to say, one, I see our shared struggle, for lack of a better way to say it. I see and I hold our shared experiences. And yet I feel this truly like amazing sense of power, given the fact that we have probably negotiated and transversed and navigated circumstances and situations around complexity that most people can't even wrap their brain around. They just don't even go there. So does it make us better? No. Does it make us worse? No. That's just fact. So when we think about that, right, it's like, what is the expanse of this experience today look like in terms of using our experiences, not exploiting them, but sort of tapping into those things to say, yeah, I know a little bit about complexity. Yeah, I know a little bit about feeling something that is really hard, but yet still moving into a space of trying to find the joy and the place of like moving things into a different place. So that's precisely what I sort of hope to gather from this conversation. And I want to go to Kshetra because I feel like one of the things that has come up is this, like, all right, we're protesting, we've got Black Lives Matter kind of right, like in the forefront. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just now there's a resurgence of the turn of phrase, of the movement, of the things that are happening on the policy side, on the protest side, on the people side. I want to start to move into this place of like, okay, so what do we do with all of this, right? What do we do with all of it? Now, there's some urgency around families who have adopted Black and brown kids, right, today. And a lot of families that I know are literally drinking through the fire hose. Like, okay, I got it. And now what do I need to do, right? So given the work that you do, right, what are some things that we should be thinking about in addition to protesting and contacting lawmakers and doing all the sort of the high level transactional things and the in the moment kind of movement that feels like a collective, rally cry? Take us to a place of, what could you do that is in service to the Black community that has nothing to do with a protest or a legislative, action? As a mother of a Black boy, what would you want to see any person do in service to protecting the psychological, physical, and emotional safety and celebrating Blackness?
Yeah, I mean, I see the larger scale, the macro level things that need to happen, but I feel like none of that happens without individuals changing their views and becoming more empathic, more understanding, having a genuine connection to the Black community and their local communities. So for me, it's all about changing each individual and educating them, that's so much of my work, is educating these families, educating people around me to help them understand what is racism really, not just the overt things, but what are the small things that tear away. And so for me, it's all about getting people to understand. And I see this distinct difference between those who might call themselves anti-racist and those who truly are anti-racist. Certainly it's a journey and you're always learning. And I know I'm certainly always learning too. And I loved hearing from Marcus and Milton today about some of their experiences. But for me, it's, I feel like there's so many people who know just enough to be dangerous and it causes harm, that they think that they're anti-racist. They think they know all the things, but what they know is just enough to end up tone policing or to end up, putting their fragility out there as a white person. And I really want to help people be part of this conversation in a way that their defenses can be down and they're open to learning, open to recognizing they are going to feel guilty, even if it's not their fault, in particular, but creating space for all of us to have those uncomfortable conversations. And as a hardcore introvert, I'm all about the deep dive into conversations. Like, let's tell me about your deepest, darkest secrets. Like that's, I'm a psychologist, that's what I do. But at the same time, like I realize not everyone's ready to go there right away. So I try to make things palatable for people to understand, but I think people just need to start talking to each other and, doing things to step outside of their comfort zone, whether that means, supporting a Black-owned business in their community or ordering food from them, just starting with those small steps. It's just the tip of the iceberg, but it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, no, gosh, I love all of that. It's just like a genuineness, right? There's a genuineness, and that's like one of the parents that I know said, a white parent adopted a Black child, said, I finally got my kid at a really great school where there's diversity and all these things, and but she still wants to be with the white girls. And she was wrought. She was like, gosh, like, what am I doing wrong? I don't know what to do. And I said, well, do you have Black friends? Do they come to your home? Does your daughter see you loving Black people? Because she's going to do what you do. So there's like, and it was like a light bulb went off, like, oh my gosh, like, oh, wait, what, like, what, wait, whoa. Like, so it's something that, especially in the transracial adoption experience, we transfer the work of culture and race onto our kids and say, oh, honey, don't you want to go to that group? Like, don't you want to go do that? Oh, we'll make space for this and you'll go do that. But mom and dad or mom or whatever, they're not coming along for the ride, and they're not leading that. So I take a lot of these experiences that I'm trying to help adoptive parents through, and I translate it right to, so folks that want to get behind the more Black Lives Matter and being in support of Black and brown people. It's kind of like, well, where's the authenticity? Like that song you listen to on your iPod, man, that shows my age. Your in Apple Music, like, you know, that song you listen to, do you know where that song came from? You know, do you have an inquisitive nature around that thing? Because to your point, there is this feeling of, when pushed, Amy Cooper in the park with her dog off leash, with Christian Cooper asking her to put her dog on leash. When pushed, you know, you might lean into a place. So there's just like, you know, how do we bring these two things together? Like celebrating the beauty and the joy and the strength and the amazingness, and then acknowledging that there's other systematic things that need to happen. It's both and I think that's really where I call sort of like, you don't pass the smell test when you're doing all this stuff and yet not really embracing some of the more, you know, sort of the softer things, the culturally expansive things. Look at your recently watched on Netflix. Look at what you're consuming. Like, what does that tell you about who you're really inspired by and what you're really inspired by? And so I'm going to go to Marcus next, because I feel like, you know, this is sort of where we turn into kind of what you want people to be doing in service to Black Lives Matter, and you know, what do you want to see happen, and like on the large scale, and maybe even, you know, on the small scale, or both and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a tough, like, mountain to climb in terms of where to start. I think, you know, using my perspective of just navigating both places where, you know, there's a majority of Black people, majority of white people, which I've done for a lot of my life, I've been able to see what's kind of absent from either or. So in terms of the cultural conversation, I think, you know, and in this time also, after George Floyd, I know I had a lot of white friends who I'd gone to school with who reached out to me and were asking me, you know, kind of, what should I do? I care. My heart's in the right place, but I'm just unsure. And I think my first approach to it all in the discussion point was, you need to educate yourself about what we're talking about. Because what I realized through a lot of these conversations is, it was just like, white privilege is such a bubble that, like, even though there's these things that have been happening in the Black culture in regards to Black Lives Matter, et cetera, like, there's a lot of white people who just haven't seen it. Like, it hasn't made, you know, going back to your conversation or your point about what you consume, there's a lot of people who just don't consume it to an extent that it's just like, it hasn't made it into the world, like all the things that we're talking about in terms of these issues with police. And like, amazing as it may seem, like, being as a person, you know, a part of the Black community where it's always been on my radar, it's like some of these things they're just not aware of. So I you know, I had a couple of things I shared on social media, and then I saw was getting shared a lot about, you know, little snippets about systemic racism and what that actually looks like in terms of things from like redlinings, where, you know, Black people weren't allowed to buy homes, so they couldn't accumulate wealth at the same rate as other communities. Systemic racism in the workplace, where it goes into like, if you have a certain name, you're like 50% less likely to get a call back from your employer, even though you have the same credentials, like things like that. Just, I realized through a lot of these conversations, there needed to be like a broader education to understand what systemically was happening. And so like, that's one of the things that I've noticed that's changed a lot among, you know, a lot of people that I've known who are white. It's just their understanding and their willingness to educate themselves, and then going to see them educate themselves and educate other people about what the actual issue is. Because if you don't know what it is, and then you can't acknowledge it. If you can't acknowledge it, then you can't do something about it. So it's weird. It's there needs to be like a mass education at some level of those things first. I think that would be that thing I want to see first amongst a lot of people, so we're all on the same page in terms of that. And then I think it trickles down to a smaller, more micro conversation of like what we can do in our what we can do independently, but then also in our family circles, friendship circles, colleagues, and then outwards. I think it's a mass education, and then kind of a change of behavior at an individual level spreading out from each person. So hopefully that wasn't too general, but
no, I think, look, one of the things, and Milton, I'm going to ask you, I want you to think about one thing that I'm going to come to you in a second, but one thing that you think would be useful for folks to like do that maybe hasn't been said, right? Like something that occurs to you, and I'll give you an example, that I happen to do a lot of work in schools, and you look at some disproportionality data, which permeates everything with Black and brown people, right? And education is a really easy one. You go to your local, your state Department of Ed, and you pull some in and out of school suspension numbers, and you look at the population of students of color compared to white students, and national averages usually bear out the same in states, which is that more Black and brown kids get suspended and get out the classroom, out the school than their white peers. Period. The end. Full stop. So it's this reality that I don't personally like to look up data like that. Like I just did it for my home state of Rhode Island, where I lived for 17 years of my life, and I didn't like what I saw. I don't like the data anywhere, but I also posted that on social media post haste, because I was like, all of these people that are in my lovely community of growing up that just think none of that stuff happens here. You look at your home state, or you look at the state that you're in, or the district that you're in. This is all public record, y'all. This is what you pay your taxes for. Anybody can look up data, who gets arrested, and look at that by race and gender. You can look at disproportionality in school, suspensions. So it's like part of this is like, equipping yourself with little details here or there to pull out, because you're going to need those things to convince folks of stuff. So, I get the sense that anybody who signed up to be in this space tonight is willing and able to do more, to do something. And it's these little things and some big things that all go back to having the conversations that you might need to pull out a piece of data for that guy in your office that like keeps resisting this idea. And you might pull out some data and say, oh, well, but guess what? Did you know this? Just so you know, this is what I know. And so Milton, what's one thing that folks can do? And then we're gonna take some questions, Mike. I know there's some questions, so we'll take some questions. But what's one thing that you think folks can do, like that may not occur to folks to do?
I think it's if I have to answer that question with just kind of one thing, it would be to experience the discomfort of simply being open without prejudice, like checking your own prejudice. And to me, what I'm saying is, kind of going back to, just a point you were talking about with data. Data is a real tricky thing, because, there are plenty of examples around in which the data that's committed to record is flawed. right? And you could bring up a data point such as, let's just, just like you were talking about, in which the incarceration or detention rates for Black and brown children is substantially higher than white counterparts. Most people in their mind, that just kind of makes sense. And to me, it makes sense to me because it's like, I think pound for pound, more Black kids are troubled than white kids, the way I see it. Like I said, you live under the duress of racism, and many of us are gonna want to act out, and you can start to kind of formulate that logic that may support kind of the opposing view of maybe the spirit of what you may be going for. So what I'm talking about is this, the prevailing narrative, I think, out there of Black folks is a function of the machine that has created that narrative, coupled with the limited experience that people have with Black folks. It's almost kind of like, it's just a human nature thing. You'll kind of, the regular Black folks are kind of the invisible Black folks. The stereotypical Black person, those are the Black people that everyone sees. And it's just kind of a reinforcement of the narratives that are out there. And it's my position that that kind of narrative that people see, yeah, that dude exists, that woman exists, but they are the minority within the Black community. There's a lot of just regular Black folks that are just like regular people. And if you hang out with them and befriend them and kind of check your prejudices and just be open to really learn and just kind of understand, I think that just makes a world of a difference. This is not to say, I think there are big differences between Black folks, white folks, Asians. But I think the differences ought to be celebrated, So it's a thing that it's almost kind of a hard ask to actually realize, because I don't think it's almost human nature for people to go, okay, well, even though I'm 40 years old and I've seen the world this way as it pertains to this particular thing, now I'm being asked to kind of relax a bit and be open and take in without prejudice. I think that's damn near impossible. I do. So, which is why I'm kind of the school of thought that says, hey, you need to let, people are going to be people, but now it's just kind of time to get yourself together. It's time to get yourself together. But if I had to answer that question, April, I would just have to say, hey, non-Black folks, try to be open. Try to be open and almost kind of challenge some of the narratives that you've been fed or you think and said, befriend some Black folks. It's kind of a good time.
Yes, it is 100%. And yeah, going back to a couple of things you said, this idea that, I've been talking a lot about personal operating systems and resetting them, right? And, these deeply ingrained operating systems that come with legacy and generational things that are good and empowering, and that are also challenging and painful. In real time right now, what's fascinating about the time we live in, we're actually called upon in this moment, as we all are come together, to say, like, what do our personal operating systems look like? We actually have a little bit of a head start to some of this work because of our family structures that we've been adopted into, many of us, or adopted children into. Either we've been adopted into them or we've done the adopting. It's so thick. Like, it's so thick right now. It's just so thick you can cut it with a knife. Like, at least in my world, in as much as, you know, there's been a lot of support on one level, and then there's been a lot of chaos and confusion on another, in terms of people not knowing what to say, what to do, and that, you know, is the space in which I need to just be who I am and not have to do a lot of work. I need to come back to that space and not have to work. I get paid to do the work with other folks, like, right, to sort of help them navigate. Like in my own family, I can't, it feels like I can't do that too. So there's definitely a tension for me with that on some level, and yet very much a holding in a lot of ways too, and an expansion. And I find that generationally, even more so. I think, you know, my parents are active and engaged in some ways to try to help themselves learn and understand, but it's my nieces and nephews that really provide that scaffolding and that comfort for me. But it is like this tightrope walk on some level, right? And at the end of the day, what I want to make space for and name is that it is ultimately crazy exhausting. There's so much emotional labor that goes into that it's like makes us probably some of the strongest human beings on the planet when it comes to emotional, just managing emotional elements. So Marcus, say a little bit about that for you, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I would double down on the exhausting part, certainly. And April's been there as I've had to navigate discussing culture with my adoptive family and having to be that ambassador, and kind of cater these conversations. So yeah, I mean, it's super, super, super hard because I think, I mean, even outside Black Lives Matter in my adoptive family, you know, which is primarily white, with the exception of I have one other adopted brother. It's weird. It's like I feel like I have to be the spokesperson for my culture, because within my immediate adopted family, like there's no other Black people in proximity. So it's all those questions I always have to field. And it's a lot. It feels like I have to have the answer for everything. And then you also have to deal with, I mean, I've personally dealt with a lot of dealing with people's ignorance, like just maybe an uncle or a cousin saying something, like in the conversation where we're trying to open up and be more empathetic, they feel the urge to say something that's ignorant and is super insensitive, but they're just not aware of it. But it's like, you're just like, wow, okay. We're gonna get back to that point, but that was wild, like kind of thing. So, and yeah, no, I've had a lot of those conversations, and unfortunately, you know, I wish I had a good way of going about it, and you know, had a silver bullet for being kind of that ambassador for your culture within your own family. You know, if there's differences in point of view, but it's something that I struggle with. I certainly say, and I you know, I've talked a lot with April about it, where it's, you know, an incremental inch forward in the conversation is progress nonetheless. Maybe you're not seeing the change in your family that you want to see on a massive scale, but anything that's moving the conversation slightly forward is valuable. That being said, also, like, be aware of yourself emotionally and how it's weighing on you, and kind of be able to step back from it and create a safe space for yourself and distance yourself for a little bit of a while, no matter how that, you know, how that looks like. If it's taking a walk, you know, if it's spending some time somewhere else. You know, I've certainly had conversations in my family, my adopted family, where I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna go visit my friends for like a day and like not come back for a while I like blow off some steam. And it's like, it's important to understand like those incremental changes, progression in conversation, it's going positive, but also to leave space for your own self-care and self-health, because it's taxing. It's like, for me personally, I can only speak from my own experience, but it's been taxing being that person who has to like host these conversations where it automatically falls to me. So yeah. April, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on.
No, I mean, we can go to the next question, but what would I just say is, like, to anybody who asked that question, like, you don't have to do it, by the way.
Yeah.
Guess what? Yeah, like, you don't have to do it. For when I see you and I validate you with that feeling, and you know what? You can say, nope.
Yeah.
Not doing it. like that, just own that and be okay with that. I know it's risky. Look, it's risky, right? Colin Kaepernick took a knee. Transracially adopted person took a knee. People think he risked his NFL career. He risked way more than his NFL career with a white family that was like raising him. Okay, let's just be clear on record to say that. So, but he did it nonetheless, right? And so, but you don't have to take a knee. You don't have to do anything. You just be, like, you don't have to do that. So I just want to hold space for folks to say, like, nah, you don't have to be ill about it, but it's not your job. So hopefully that helps. Next question.
Right.
Yeah, and so there is that second part of that, which maybe is less of a topic for you, but I think particularly among Asian adoptees is a bigger topic, which is about unpacking their own privilege and relationship to whiteness, and possibly at some point in their lives having to confront that for themselves.
Yeah.
Do you have any
experience,
any thoughts or personal experience around that, or suggestions?
Yeah, Chaitra, I'm gonna kick it to you after this, but it's like, absolutely, like I say a lot that the reason why that I was as safe as I was, although I wasn't always safe in this community, as safe as I was in a community growing up in Rhode Island, was because I wasn't a black boy, a dark-skinned black boy, right? I was like lighter skinned and I was a girl. Still didn't absolve me from a lot of stuff, but I recognize that there are certain privileges afforded to me because I have a white family that I move around with as much more as a kid than and still today, that what that does, that's real. That guilt, is real. And I think there's also another layer to this, which is for another conversation, but also should be named and also so important. It's like, when you leave that culture or that race that you were born into, and potentially, we get into all the class and the layers of this, there's just a guilt that you maybe had something better, if that was better in your opinion, than what maybe some of your family members didn't have in terms of resources and privilege and accessibility to things. So it's very real. It complicates things in a way that is hard to disentangle, and yet without doing that, we rerun the risk of being much more our own spirit. We run the risk of our own spirit being just gobbled up in that, and that's my technical term. But Chaitra probably has some better terms for us.
That idea of our proximity to whiteness and how that can bring up our own guilt, especially as transracial adoptees who are not Black. That resonates so strongly, because I definitely recognize the ways that I had to unpack my own guilt, my own fragility around things that I thought were true, having grown up in whiteness, and really having to come from under that umbrella of white privilege to understand what it truly meant to be a person of color in the world. And to then, all these feelings come up of feeling like, am I betraying someone? Am I going to be ostracized or rejected by this group for starting to move on this journey and believe things in this way? Or am I going to be accepted by these people who I feel like I haven't been as connected to or supportive of for so long? And so I would say, yeah, we have this unique capacity as transracial adoptees, I think, to be very empathic to non-traditional journeys. And so we can use that as a way to open up, to be aware of other people's journeys, to be more open to the things that, we see other people struggling with, and understand where that's coming from. And so much of it is that we have to do our own work too, just as anybody does. Like, we have to be doing our own work to understand how being raised within that umbrella of white privilege has impacted the way that we view the world and view other people of color, especially Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people. There are a lot of more negative stereotypes out there, whereas opposed to Asians, we're the model minority. That's the big stereotype for us. So we need to be able to unpack more of that and recognize that there are ways that we can support, in some ways really be that middle bridge to support people who are Black, who may be struggling with some of these things more, and to be the ones who can take on some of that burden to educate people who are white, to educate our families, to support them, to be part of that process.
Most of us are transracial adoptees. We often learn what it means to be our race based on how society treats us. And so how has your transracial adoption experience helped you to see more or less value in the construct of race?
Well, I think it's almost the thing for me. It's almost the thing. I remember when we had Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and I had a lot of my female friends be like, "But Hillary," I'm like, "I'm Black before I'm a woman. Period. Full stop. The end." Like that's just me, right? Like and just it's just forward. Like it's just always like just like sort of the first thing I think about is being Black, biracial, person of color in the world. I don't know if that sort of answers, but Marcus, I don't know. Do you have an answer for that or a thought on that?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, just to kind of point the question a little bit is, I feel like the question is getting at that sometimes the identity is forced upon us, and we may not feel it, but maybe that wasn't your experience. So that's, I think, kind of what the question is asking about.
A white identity or?
No, like say a Black identity, or as an Asian person, people see you as Asian, so they force an Asian identity upon you.
Yeah. Or they just expect certain things that you should know or should you be able to do. And yeah, oh gosh, well, that all day. Like, yes, people see you and think you should be X, Y, Z. People, like to make certain assumptions about you. Absolutely. Yes, and then you become authority on everything, like to do with Black and brownness, if especially when you're in a white space, like you become the authority on those things. So I yes, definitely. But yet for me, I welcome that. I want to be seen. Like I want to be seen. I want to be an authority. I want to be someone people come to ask questions. I don't always feel like I do feel a little bit of imposter syndrome sometimes because I wasn't raised by a Black family. But I think now at this point in my life, I'm like, I know enough, and I'm happy to be that. I'm happy to do that. And I'm happy to be seen as a person of color in that way. Did that help answer the question? And Shaitra, do you want to, because I know we have about 10 minutes, so I just want to get as many questions as we can.
I just wanted to add some, because I feel like that's something so many of the clients that I see struggle with, is this sense of, do I fit the stereotype? Do I defy the stereotype? How do I know who I am if all I'm doing is trying to do things in spite of or because of what other people expect? So I think that's a constant internal battle for us, trying to figure out who we are without all these external expectations of who we are based on our appearance.
Absolutely. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point.
I'm sorry, Marcus, and I cut you off, so please feel free if you have any comment around that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would double down on what Shaitra said in terms of, feeling the weight to be something like a certain thing. Yeah, no, I think it's really comes down to a lot of your own self-knowledge, your knowledge of yourself. And I think it's, it's cliche to say be unapologetically yourself, but it's like, if you try to be anything, it's like you're gonna be unhappy. If you try to match somebody else's stereotype of what you should be, you're gonna end up not being yourself. And it's just, I don't know. To me, I made a kind of, I felt that pressure at different periods of when I was younger, much more so. But that people had a certain expectation of me, and I kind of made a resolution to just be kind of unapologetically myself, even if it went in the face of what people's stereotypes were of me when they came across me. And it started a lot of weird conversations. It started being like, oh wow, you're kind of a lot of this for a Black guy. You're kind of a lot of this for, like, all of that stuff. And I just, I found it happier to just kind of be myself and kind of ignore all that. And it's a hard thing to do, but it's like, who are you trying to please? At the end of the day, you should be trying to please yourself before somebody's expectation of you. And that's just kind of where I personally stood. And I think it's a good place to be, you know, if I don't say so myself.
Yeah, and it takes a community and a support, and sometimes mental health services, and sometimes things that like a scaffolding around you to do that big work.
Yeah.
Given our family experiences and our so it's one thing to sit here and listen to us in our spaces and you know, but it's not without its like, you know, talk to my therapist, he'll tell you all day, like all the things that that we've discussed in terms of, no, he won't tell you because, you know, whatever, but I'll tell you because I'm an open book. But it's like that's not an easy get given all the things that we've navigated. So just wanted to make space on the tail end of that question to say, like, it's real, validated, and to know that you got it. In order to do that, just make sure you've got this kind of a container of love and understanding and all the things that we need.
And just so one last question, because we got a lot of questions around this, which is about being an ally, as this is coming from a lot of non-Black adoptees or their families or things like that, saying, how do they support and be a part of this movement, but at the same time recognize that Black voices need to be centered in it? And so how do they, you know, what kind of role can they play in that? And is there, in particular, given the superpowers of transracial adoptees, is there a certain role that maybe that transracial adoptees can play that may be a little bit different?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm gonna wrap it up with that, but I'm gonna ask Milton if you want to go and give a moment, and then I'll go to Marcus and Shatra, and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, that question of how do you offer support is a very tricky thing. It's a very, very tricky thing. And it's a tricky thing because, you know, kind of who you offer support to, because supporting Black Lives Matter might just mean being there for your Black friend, right? It's very, very tricky. And only thing that I would say, because I just think about it with me, is, you know, to me, support just kind of feels like asking me some questions about what's going on for the purpose of information, not a purpose of a fight or a rebuttal. Just kind of get my take. Let me talk. Let me talk about the way I feel, the way that I see it. And try not to go in there with a critique or like I said, a rebuttal. Just let me talk, because we as Black folks, we're processing all this too. We as transracial adoptees are processing all this too. And I think a lot of times when people are kind of in the throes of it, you know, support just feels like a friend who's there to listen and not to fight and not to be more of the kind of the abrasion that we get from the outside world, but a place of comfort and understanding, or a place of understanding that just says, I'm just here to listen to you, let you kind of talk and vent. So, and to me, I think that's just kind of the first step. You know, I think your relationship with that person that you're talking about, you want to support, or the movement, your relationship and proximity would kind of dictate some of the hows and what. But even as you kind of look to support on a larger level, you know, I excuse my French, but sometimes you need to know when to shut the fuck up. And there's a lot of talk that goes against who and what we are. And this ain't the time to impose your position on something. And I see that happening quite a bit. So just be open and let someone talk. I think that's a great way to support.
And then Marcus and Shatra, and then we'll close.
Apologies. Do you mind stating the question again? My apologies.
Yeah, sure. It's around how non-Black adoptees, transracial adoptees, and maybe adopted families can support support you in Black Lives Matter, and without, you know, taking too much spotlight for themselves. And then also there's kind of a corollary question, which is maybe that transracial adoptees, given kind of a heightened awareness of race and having lived that experience, maybe have a special role to offer support or build community.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Yeah, no, I mean, I'd echo a lot of Milton's sentiments around just creating a space, you know, and really allowing these, creating a room for these conversations and for people to voice their own specific experiences. And I think this, you know, one case of mine comes back to, you know, April mentioned at the beginning of this, I do mentoring, and we had a mentoring session with some adoptive children, and we opened up about like our experiences in the Black Lives Matter movement and around being Black and our interactions with people around race, and if we, you know, experience injustice and anything like that. And we just left it open and left the space. And there's some amazing stories that came out of it and experiences that I didn't know some people had. You know, you have these people in your life that are in your life for a long time. They may be colleagues and maybe friends, but you don't really know how deep their experiences are when it comes to culture. And if you leave space for it, there can be some phenomenal insights and stories that can come out that will educate you in a deeper way about who that person is, but also their culture. And I think, April, you know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of this one particular woman who just opened up completely about her experience with the police when she was younger, and she ended up, you know, just going through the legal system and getting a settlement out of this, out of, you know, wrongful conduct by the police. And it was just you know, educating her the whole circle about herself and the world that she came from and stuff like that. And I think that allowing room for those conversations allows room for empathy, you know, because after those conversations, you are, what happens to you is basically you're struck with people aren't who they appear on the surface. And it causes you to think more critically as you walk through the world about treating people with more humanity, more empathy in general, because you don't know where they came from, you don't know what they've experienced, you don't know what they're going through today, you don't know what they'll go through tomorrow, and just extend them that simple kindness of looking at them without any judgment and an open eye and being receptive to what they have to say. And I think that's probably one of the most valuable things that I've benefited from personally and being around, is people who just open up and hold space for those conversations without jumping in and putting their perspective. Because I think once you jump in and assert your kind of perspective, the conversation stops. Mm-hmm, you know, it's like people who have something to say, they'll pull back and like, okay, well, this woman has already decided how they want to feel about this. Like, I don't need to have this conversation. But if you just don't say anything, you just listen. It's really amazing. So
yeah, in the interest of time, we're a couple minutes. And Mike, I apologize. We were supposed to give you more time at the end of this. We didn't. And Chaitra, I'm going to sort of wrap it up and just make sure that we just hit a couple of points super fast. Truth be told, we do have superpowers as transracially adopted persons, right? And whatever that looks like for you, whether that's leveraging the privilege of your white family to be in conversation or to go into spaces where you are more apt to be in that persons of color aren't, you know, who are in a different sort of family family structure, use them. If that's what you feel inspired by, if you want to stretch to that, great. If you want to be on the other end of that spectrum and be like, what I'm going to do is take better care of myself within my family structure and within my identity and with my experience to then down the road be better to do something, you know, to be better equipped to do something like that, that's actually doing the work with us too. Like, so I just want to make space for that expansive idea of wherever you are in this, like, in this flow, in this experience, that like, the one thing is for sure, we have all navigated complexity of identity, of family experience, and of being safe emotionally, physically, and psychologically in the world in ways that most people have not. So do what you will with it, but most importantly, make sure that you are doing those protective things and those celebratory things for yourself. And this space tonight was all about that. So Mike, Jacqueline, Leah, panel, everybody, like, just thank you. And more than willing, I won't speak for the panel, to come back and just do a straight Q&A on this, a straight dialogue, because I felt without the sort of the backstory and without coming into it within a certain way, it just wouldn't have, I just don't think it would have been doing us a justice in the conversation. So I know we're at time, and I apologize deeply for not minding it better. I'm usually better at that. So virtualworld.com.
I think it was perfect. Thanks to all of our panelists. I'm giving you a standing ovation, and I'm sure we have several hundred attendees here, and everyone here is thought it went very well. So that's awesome. Thank you. You know, it's crazy to think that without a entirely new technology having been created, this, you know, smartphone, and without this global pandemic, actually both of these things happening, we probably would not be having this conversation. We wouldn't be in this place right now as a country. And I note that with, you know, some profound sadness, but also maybe a little bit of hope that because we are in the situation and because we have had this spotlight on this subject, that maybe we can at this time really bring some real change. I just want to give the panelists a final opportunity to say, if you have like a social media account or any place that you want to offer as a way for people to contact you, and you don't feel any obligation, but if you have that website, you know, feel free to say so.
Milton, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, so you can contact me at Rock Mill Fitness, R-O-K as in Republic of Korea, Mill as in Milton, Rock Mill Fitness. Thank you.
Marcus.
And I have to say to AKA, thank you so much for really creating the space and really being able to provide like this kind of dialogue, because I think this is the kind of support that that people need, and the kind of information that's really valuable to folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Milton, how about you, Marcus?
Yeah, no, I would say if you want to reach out to me personally, feel free to look me up on Facebook. You'll see my face. I'm Marcus Schmidt. And yeah, I mean, happy to talk to anybody about my experience. And other than that, I mean, I would definitely have to plug April's podcast, Born in June, Raised in April. Phenomenal resource, phenomenal conversations. Actually, how I found April. I found her podcast first before I found her. But it was so amazing that I had to reach out with her, and that's how our relationship started. So shameless plug for that. Definitely check that out. So,
Especially the one episode.
With that, and Chaitra, how about you?
Yeah, I can be reached at, so I'm on Facebook at Beyond Words Psychological Services, and also online, growbeyondwords.com. I have a lot of resources for transracial adoptees and transracially adopted families. Really thank you to AKA, all of you who put this together, and in this mad rush of having to get people signed in and registered, and I so appreciate that. And I really appreciate the space that was created today. And April, Milton, and Marcus, thank you so much for sharing your voices. I appreciate it.
And just June and April, everything for me, Dinwoodie.com. And without Steve Jobs, who is an adopted person, we know, or like in his spirit is still with us very much, we would not have some of these technologies. So I just want to name that. And also Brother Colin Kaepernick as well, who transracially adopted, you know, all the folks doing big things, superhero powers like all of us. So tap into it, know you're loved, and appreciate AKA Beyond for the space.
Thank you to all of you. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.